which are very, very relevant for us to understand why they are saying what they are saying, so that even if you are going to be using, because your organization wants you to use, or that is the most convenient tool for you to use, or that is the most, let's say, the best of your talent that you can create, or there may be any number of such reasons why you are continuing to use it, not to worry. But what can be done, like all good risk managers do, is learn from others to make our processes better. And today our focus on this particular, approach is going to be only for risk matrices. The plural, the use of the plural is basically because there are any number of matrices. Dr. Rakesh very generously introduced me as an operational risk and resilience expert. To a large extent, yes, I am one. And in one of my practices as a consultant, I have seen risk matrix being as large as 9x3 and all that. So why I'm saying what I'm saying is, it is for the organization. We will come to that also on a specific way. We will also consider two distinct thought leaders on both the nay and not the total nay, as I say, not a complete no. There is a friend of mine, a top expert who I am lucky to consider a friend. He considers me a friend, who has completely, his advocacy is, this is complete rubbish. The risk matrix is complete rubbish. On the other hand, I have an expert who is also in one sort of a guide for me, who says, yeah, there are flaws, but don't throw away the risk matrix. Use, intelligently.
Sir, there is sir.
Yeah. So with this, we will go forward. What we will do is a small recap. A recap on what the risk matrix is.
Check பண்ணி பார்த்துட்டு சொல்றீங்களா சார்? ஏன்னா நான் தான் வந்து in person நானும் ஸ்டாஃப்
Somebody's mic is open, please. If you don't mind, can you kindly mute it?
Yeah.
Hello.
Now it's muted.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So a risk matrix, when do we use it? We use it when we bring it to the assessment stage. We identified a risk. We all agree, yes, that is a risk to our process, our organization, our product, our particular current topic, whatever. And then we need to assess what is the risk, how frequently can it happen, and if it happens, what can be the impact, so on and so forth. So what do we do?
Sir, 4 days general 7.5, senior citizen 7. General 7, senior citizen 7.5.
Hello, Mr. Sarath Babu.
Can I request the participant to kindly mute his mic, please?
Sir. Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Sir.
Mr. Sarath Babu, can you kindly mute your mic, sir? Thank you. So we use it as a tool at the assessment stage, and it is a very simple mechanism, as I told you. So therefore, it has, found a great degree of adoption. Right from literature talking about it, during our training courses, we impart knowledge about it, and our organizational policies require us to adopt it and practice it, whatever be the driver. The fact is, the simplicity is the cause or the causal factor of such drive of adoption. Whatever may be the flaw, inherent flaw that the experts say, be it as it may be, the adoption is itself sometimes a proof that, despite all the flaws, it is still very useful. We all know fossil fuel pollutes and all that, but most of us still, almost 90-95% of the total transportation is dependent on fossil fuel based transportation method of, issues. Why? We all know that there are flaws, but that is the most convenient till the replacement is found. So using that as an analogy, we will try to understand what a risk matrix is. If it is so flawed as being pointed out by the expert, the obvious question that pops out is, why then is it being even adopted? So therefore, the reasons till, it is replaced, in the medical field, in the pharma field, participants, friends from the pharma industries who are here, they know the rate of replacement is even as high as the software industry itself. Why? Because of certain side effects being, earlier not identified, and therefore now being coming or, being put to the forefront, and so on and so forth. So, and earlier drug that was considered panacea, a manna from a heaven, had today suddenly become on the banned list, has found a place on the banned list. Why? Because of certain other developments that took place, which led to such a decision. So it can move from one end of the spectrum. In this case, to put it contextually, you have spectrum of usage, spectrum of adaptability, spectrum of risk managers using this as a tool to, represent or display what they want to display. So one of the most, as we'll see in the next few slides also, one of the biggest reasons, apart from the simplicity, is its stark visibility. In fact, risk matrix, there is a different school of thought which says risk matrix is the father of all dashboards in this world. May be true, may not be true. I don't have research. I have not done enough study into that. So I have no, for or against opinion on it. But there is a group that thinks that the risk matrix, whenever it was conceived way back in the 19th, early, 20th century, and then that became the template for all dashboards to come up. May be true, but that is a proof. If it is true, it is only a proof of its adaptability and the ability for people to understand. So how do we compute risk? We don't just put up a risk matrix just on the qualitative scale. We even complete, a quantitative approach by assigning values. We will look at why these values that drive this matrix itself could be your problem. We will look at it when we look at why the people, the experts are saying is that is the reason why it is losing its relevance. So coming back to the original point, how do we normally compute? We normally compute it as a factor of a product of the probability of an event that can cause a risk and the impact if it happens in a particular manner. So it is normal. If this particular hypothesis itself, being a product itself is being challenged in many literature. That may be so. In fact, in my suggestion to my clients, I always say make it a factor of probability and impact. Don't make it a product of, because product assumes that your two factors of that product, the multiplier values are exact, unless you have a science or a methodology to prove that estimations are exact. The probability, we all know if you flip a coin, you know what the probability will be, but it is not as absolute as either a head or a tail. Every event has dependencies, multivariable dependencies, and each of those dependencies are again subject to certain conditionalities, either being present or being absent. And therefore, when we look at such a, let's say, disparate requirement, what comes is at best a very, nearby value. That means within a particular range of a value. So when we have an estimation-driven product, the product itself is going to carry all the flaws of such estimation. So what else can be done? Again, that is a very moot question. So it can be a factor of two factors being probability and impact. In many literature, you will call it likelihood and severity. They mean the same thing. What is the likelihood of tsunami hitting the Indian coast again in the next 20 years? That in statistics is called the probability of that happening. So what will you take? You will take a host of data, when it happened, what are the conditions that triggered it, and therefore what happened to the severity, what was the severity in Andaman, which is anyway in Indian territory, and then Visakhapatnam or Chennai on the east coast, which is again Indian territory. So what is the variable that came in the middle, and so on and so forth. So all of these things, when they are the causal factor or the causative contributors to the values, then what happens is it becomes at best a derivative of whether the variables that you have chosen are correct, the data that prove that variables, whether they are consistent, and are, let's say, challengeable. That means can they stand the test of scrutiny? And therefore, when you have such slicing and dicing happening, the outcome that comes out of such a product itself would also carry the similar or intrinsic flaws. And therefore, when we adopt or accept this formula for whatever reason, convenience, policy, this is what is the best thing, has worked for us for so many years, whatever we attribute, we will adopt such a practice with a clear knowledge, yes, there is an inherent potential flaw. Why? Because this realization is the first step for any risk manager. A risk is identified first. So the risk in the calculation of risk, let's put it that way. So therefore, when you compute risk, we need to understand that it comes with such a inherent risk. This is one of the reasons why the naysayers are saying, if you are having such a flawed input, what is the value of the matrix that is displayed in such a flawed input? It is true to a large extent. It is true to a large extent. So which leaves some extent of it, which can still be defended, used, or can be this stepping stone on which probably you can continue your usage. We will look at our discussions on those basis. So we have, a 5x5 matrix or a 3x3 matrix. Most of us have, a 3x3 matrix, 3 on the likelihood scale and 3 on the impact scale. Very simple, very simple, easy construct. But when you want to make it very finer, when you have everything simple, has a tendency to cover, the complex thing. That means the simplicity. Oversimplifying something can actually remove the focus from that event. So at times you'll have to make sure that there is a balance between, making it simple for people to understand or, consume it. At the same time, not lose the, importance of it. That is why even a knife comes with a cover, though it is this stated use of that particular product is to cut. So therefore, you can't assume that every user will know what you will do. So therefore, you bring in a degree of gradation, a degree of, granularity to expect. So the greater the granularity, greater will be your risk matrix construct. So right from, rare, will tsunami happen? We thought it will happen once in 1,000 years. But do we have data what happened in 1004 to be very certain that it will again happen in 2004 as it did? Or can we now safely say, no, it will happen only in 3004? So when we define these things, we look at define category definition bias and so on and so forth. So we want a greater granularity to accommodate, what it is. Or since we don't have data for the granular, distinction, discrimination of data and all that, what we do, we tend to club it together. Saying, boss, let us make it only low. If it is not going to affect me, it is going to be low. Or if it is not going to happen in a particular frequency, it is low. And, during non-peak hours, the risk of accidents happening is low. This is what the police predicates. So it allows the traffic to move at a different speed by adjusting the, signal intervals and so on and so forth. So what we decide or what we understand from the context is how this matrix system is derived. Most of us know this. So we can even go to the extent of assigning what will be the consequential action required if it, reaches a particular level of requirement or definition. So if you this particular display in front of us, you can even see at the catastrophic level, the organization has even defined stop. In the risk treatment, we call it, completely avoid that risk. Avoiding the risk is to stop the activities that create that risk. So when it comes to a score or potentially the estimation is to that, even the risk treatment can be defined there. So it becomes a holistic tool. One of the reasons why it is very popular, or it's not only the ease of construct, not only the adaptability according to the granularity that we want, but also where we can build in what could be the stated response. So if this is the, let us say, the response in your organization. So once the score is going somewhere between 16 and above, or let's say even bordering on the 15, you will immediately put up the flag to say, boss, no further action in this. That is easier said than done, but it would be codified, and therefore, however difficult it is, the organization would follow that. So there is a great, as you can see, there is a great impetus to use or adopt such a tool. So then you will understand why not all people are naysayers. When they say, is it still relevant? A guy who is acting on this, who is very confident that his scoring system is very correct, will say, obviously, it has been working for us for the past 50 years, 80 years, whatever. If you go to a colleague from State Bank of India, where I started my career 42 years back, he will tell you it is working for me very well. What are you now telling? There are naysayers in the world. Because for him, it is working very well. So you should continue working. So what it means is the tool itself can have multiple, what we call a Swiss Army knife sort of a functionality. You could have different, not only estimation, not only an ability to quantify it, not only therefore a process to rank risk, but also to suggest or even actually template and codify what sort of risk responses or what we in other ways call risk treatment should be given by the organization. So where the risk is in a desirable function, that means the risks are okay. We all know if you do something, there will be a risk. If you don't do something, there will be a greater risk. So risk is inherent to everything that we do. Risk is inherent to everything that we don't do also. So risk is the actual constant. Your risk as an absolute value, may be changing, but risk as a factor is an absolute constant. So what changes is what you want to do. So there is, when your risks are within your defined levels, all you have to make sure is no boat is rocked. That means, kuch hilo mat, if you want to talk in our colloquial language. That means you don't change anything. Make sure everything is going on. What is the risk? Coming back to the basics. A risk is what can go wrong in a process. If you already identified it, you call it inherent risk. So what do? When you identify an inherent risk as a risk manager, you immediately put a control on top of it. The control can be inherent again to the process itself where the risk has been identified. It can be external. Whatever, the control is basically designed to bring down the risk within your tolerable value. That is why here, desirable risk. There is no further action if you look at this template. So when the control behavior is working very well, that means the risk is being maintained very well. What you identified, inherent risk, IR, minus control value, IR minus C, is equal to residual risk, RR. If the residual risk is equal to or below your risk appetite or even your tolerance levels, the immediate action prescribed is don't do anything, continue with it. If it goes above that, if it goes above the tolerance level, how much can it go? That is your risk tolerance. Your risk appetite is where you cannot allow it to go further, which you already defined. So it can be defined for different things. All of these can be put into your risk matrix. So while this all is a tool to bring in all these things, the naysayers question not the tool, but the inputs into the tool. On what basis are you saying it has gone above the tolerance? Is that quantification correct? Is the data set that you're using, is it correct? So if you bring it in, that's why the what you call ESAs, the people who say yes to the vote, we will discuss a few of that. They say, don't throw away the baby and the bathwater. Save the baby. You want to clean up the bathwater? Yes, refine your risk matrix, but don't throw it away. We will look at some of the arguments in as we go along. So again, just summarizing, simplicity. The risk matrix is very, very simple. And that is at the training stages, learning stages, it should be simple. You should make it as, relevant. When you try to make it very relevant, what happens is it automatically attracts other variables that you have probably not considered. And that is why it was simple. So automatically a degree of complexity comes in. But even that process, once it is practiced, once that is codified, once that is, knowledge transfer, other thing happens, becomes a very stratified and therefore simple process. So therefore the simplicity exists throughout its life cycle, depending on your organizational, your personal maturity levels. Visually appealing, there is no doubt about it. In fact, if you remember what I told you just a few minutes earlier, this is even considered the father of all dashboards. Why dashboards are appealing? Because they, very quickly tell you the story behind instead of words. As a old adage goes in everything, one picture was worth 1,000 words. So visually appealing, is definitely a very great tool. And therefore it sounds, it's very, useful. Because it appeals to your senses. You feel very comfortable reading it. And it's very simple for the guy who constructed it. It's like a win-win situation. So it seems very great. These are the reasons why even today you have some of the world standards adopting it. For example, your WASHAs, your, MIL STD, standard. These are all standards which still advocate the use of it, that require the use of these matrices, which you can, of course, improve on it. But at a floor, you need to use it. So the guys who developed and designed and adopted or finally formalized these standards, they are also experts on their own scale. So they can't be wrong. So therefore, this is one of the reasons why it is still, practiced. What are the advantages? Advantages is it can, allow you to use the, major advantage. It can use all data into a compressed form. You can show high risk 22, medium risk 7, low risk 60, 65. Your board will be very happy. Oh, these guys are managing 85 risk, only 25% is high. The issue seems to already identified. The entire story is being told in one single. So it is a great advantage. But significant disadvantages are there. It is depending on the user perspective. You show your risk matrix to somebody who is not exposed to risk. For all he knows, it's a very colorful diagram in front of him. This is one big problem. One big problem between a knowledge group and a, let's say, uninformed group. That within the knowledge group, again, everybody can be defining the elephant differently. So therefore, the tool by itself will have to be supplemented or supported by a very clear or clarity in the definitions that drive the tool. The second thing, as I told you earlier, it's oversimplification. In fact, in my opinion, the simplicity is its biggest problem. As they say, in darkness, your eyes will adapt. So therefore it is a great tool, right? But that itself is a risk. Because it adapts and therefore it's a great tool, you tend to take risks that you probably should not take. Oversimplification sometimes is a major problem and is also a very big, one size fits all sort of a thing. High risk need not be same for everybody, the same thing. High risk for a pharmaceutical company, and high risk for a banking company could be two different things. High risk in the aviation sector is completely different, right? And so therefore, So therefore, if you try to batch or, sort of club it together, there is a problem. And today with all sorts of data sets, big data, bad data, and so on and so forth, today with models driving most of our computations, the complex model-based dependencies cannot be captured in a, risk matrix, unless the risk matrix itself becomes then for different models and all that. Then in which case we are talking about a combination of these matrices. So therefore, these are all significant disadvantages. So what do you do? Disadvantage, you have to travel to the airport. You have to go to a meeting from Calcutta to Bombay. The flight is 2 hours, but is that your travel time? No. You probably will have to spend another 2 hours in traffic, another 1 hour for your security check-in. So despite these disadvantages, you still take the flight because you have factored in the disadvantages into your overall organizational objective. And therefore, you don't say my flight is 2 hours time. You would say your total travel time is 7 hours up and down or something like that. So when these issues that impact your risk assessment are taken on board, it is possible to sort of bring down the disadvantage, if not completely neutralize it. I don't think it is possible to neutralize it, but it can bring down the significantly disadvantageous position to probably an acceptable disadvantage position. Some very excellent work. I'm sure Dr. Rakesh will share this presentation material with all of you. I have given you a lot of URL links for further study. This is one very excellent work done by one. Of course, that gentleman today is a very senior risk management practitioner in the Society of Petroleum Engineers. When he was a research student from Philip Thomas from Indonesia, he made this along with his professors. This is one of the most significant studies that built upon some of the other studies and brought it to fore on the, let's say, the risk of using the risk matrices. Okay, so I would recommend strongly to people to kindly, go through this paper once this URL link is available with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to interrupt, Mr. Sridhar, if you can make me co-host by mistake, I think.
Sorry, sir.
You can just make me co-host.
Yeah. I'll do that straight away. Or Ms. Rashmi, can you make Dr. Rakesh the co-host? Okay, sir. I'll continue.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So, in that particular book, he has quoted earlier, what do you call, in that particular, so it's a thesis actually, a very nice material. He has quoted some of the, what do you call, significant work done by earlier researchers like Pritchard, Cox, Hubbard, Douglas Hubbard, so on and so forth. So, if you see how they have used the risk matrix, though they are asking us to go through the hypothesis of the risk of using risk matrices. So when he says you already defined what should be the action, then you are also restricting yourself to a particular set of scores that will come out because of certain input values, that will come out because of certain definitions and use of certain databases. And therefore, it could have the risk of not being consistent with what will be the correct or the right responses that will have to be taken. And the analyzing how do you even set up your risk matrix normally when you have defined your risks, and then what are the events that lead to the risk, and once you have assessed your probability and the consequence, which is the severity, then you have your risk profile or risk matrix emerging out of it. And therefore, depending on the profile and what you do with the profile in terms of your prioritization and so on and so forth, your risk acceptance levels, and therefore your risk response and risk treatment levels, you prioritize and mitigate. Normally, this is the process flow that all of us use. Most mature organizations, this is what is the standard process. Whether you use a matrix or not, you will definitely use this process. So, when we look at what are the inconsistencies they are talking about, they talk about 6 distinct inconsistencies. Risk acceptance inconsistency. When I just this morning, when I was just looking at whether what I have prepared is sufficient for the discussion, I found, it is better to expand on that. I will be expanding on each one of this, so it will anyway reach you as an input. Range compressions. What are range compressions that can happen? Centering bias. Again, all of these are again data-based, data relevant or relevant to the data. And category definition. This is, yes, data-based, all right, but category definition. What do you categorize? How do you categorize? And so on. And there is something called arbitrary ranking and ranking reversals that can happen. And probability ranges and consequences ranges, particularly for our multiplier values. We will look at each one of this as we go along. A little bit academic, but I think will be relevant. For example, when you look at risk acceptance, what do we normally do? We'll say if it is 95% probability, let's say, for example, for a discussion, we will say, oh, that means it can happen more than once a year. 95% probability that monsoon will not fail. So which will tell you it can happen more than once a year. definitely once, but also maybe more. Now, when we assign something like this, it may be consistent with actual data. It may not be consistent with actual data. Until that time, it is supposed to be having the acceptance that is inconsistency, because you as an organization, you as a risk manager, you as a risk practitioner, for some empirical or experiential learning, platform as a takeoff or a platform as a launchpad, you have come to this conclusion. Now, this may not be correct. It even need not be consistent with the actual data at the end of it. So therefore, when you accept or you go ahead till you have further data, you are supposed to be going ahead with the risk acceptance inconsistencies. And therefore, what we call course correction, midstream correction, make the necessary changes so that you do. All these are mitigative actions for your risk acceptance inconsistency. Now look at what is a compression. Okay, what is a risk compression? Range compression. The author who writes on this, one of the most popular authors that I like, he says the whole point came to his mind when somebody asked, boss, which is better? A 5x5 matrix is better than, or is a 4x4 matrix better? That made him think, why is this guy asking me this question at all? And then he found that is because it will straight away eliminate 9 cells out of the whole thing. A 4x4 matrix is a 16 cell grid. And a 5x5 cell, a matrix is a 25 grid cell. All of us know this. So what happens to the data, that was represented in the 5x5 matrix in the 9 cells, which has suddenly got, represented by a 4x4 matrix. So where did they all get condensed? Where, and that question, led to thinking something called range compression. Cox is one of the earliest proponents of this, 2008, that's almost 15 years back. And he very distinctly says in his literature, it causes significant difference in quantitative values. Of course it will, because now what you have done, you have compressed a 25 cell value into a 16 cell value. So somewhere you have made a compromise of or compressing a particular cell value into its alternate in this 16 cell, because then other 9 cells don't exist anymore. So therefore, as you can see, so the answer to it is not by expanding it to n by n, but to ensure such compressions don't, dilute or dilate or even distort the value of the risk data that you will need to. So this is the key point of understanding what range compressions are, so that we understand what it is to correct what needs to be done. So centering bias, we are almost all of us do this subconsciously, unconsciously. In some places we do it consciously. Performance management. Somebody has done moderately well. You also know that he needs a job. You tend to rate him in the middle of the scale than the lower end of the scale, which probably his modest performance would have required. Why? Because there is a bias now coming into it. So where you do not know, where you do not want to, on placing a value at the extremes, you tend to place it in the middle. Normally the middle becomes the default position. That is why you have many risks that should be high, which are defined as medium. When it is done by mistake, you can attribute it to an error. But when it is done deliberately, you have to attribute it differently. So one of the biggest problems with such a behavior, particularly in the risk matrix context, is you definitely start underestimating the high risk events, because it is moving inside, not what we call from the right to the left. Similarly, overestimation of low risk. We think an operational error, is very important, and we have more people doing maker and checker sort of controls. Then again, system processes having check digit values, so on and so forth. Why? Because we are investing too many resources into controlling because of an overestimation of a low risk event. So an organization that tends to do either or both of these will certainly be at, ending up using resources in a very suboptimal way. So prioritization, everything will go out of the window. Centering bias is, while it is the easiest thing to do and therefore the easiest thing to rectify, has a very significant consequence on the risk response actions if it is not corrected. Similarly, category definition. This is more at the policy level. If you do not categorize even the likelihood or define your likelihood as to how a likelihood is defined, what can cause a tsunami or even an error, a faulty OCR can online reading of, scanning of records can create errors in your database. So if you do not categorize the likelihood or the causal factors of such the likelihood and the severity, what you then do, you have to repeat the entire action. If it is only a improper capture of data, improper capture of images leading to capture of data, you can repeat the process, but you will be wasting resources. So category definition can be a problem. And this is another difference if it is not defined correctly or if it is defined subjectively. That means there are no definitive definitions. Then each one of us, go back to the ESAF's fable of 6 blind men. Each one of us will be defining the elephant differently. Most organizations suffer from this. No. When you said low, this is not what I meant. I'm sure you will recollect organizational conversation like that, which particularly comes from this particular thing called category definition bias. So the only remedy for this is at the policy level, at the coding level, make sure your likelihood, your categories, your criteria requirement for likelihood, severity are clearly stated. If it has to be different for different sets of instances or situations, so be it. But don't make an omnibus statement, which then allows you to have different type of interpretations and so on and so forth. Most of the organizations where I have reviewed some policies have. So from time to time, this will be reviewed from time to time. This is one of the most vague statements. Why don't you say 15 days? If you think that is too much of work, make it 30 days. If you think you don't have the resources, make it once in a quarter. What do you mean by saying time to time? These sort of problems will, create, we think it's a very easy tool. It's a nice tool. All of us are, in one way or the other we have done or we have seen these things being done. So it's important to learn so that the category definition bias doesn't come into your risk matrix. Arbitrary ranking, it comes from your subjective criteria. That is the output of the earlier flaw. Because of that arbitrary ranking, what you guys will be saying is low, some other guys will be jumping up and down saying, boss, no, it is not low, it is very high for me. And both of you will be having similar set of data, only different type of, criterion understanding, which is causing the ranking. Now, it can even have a reversal of the ranking. That means you can have contradictory positions on the same ranking. So these are issues that will come out of, flaws in the entire design that leads to a matrix. And for this purpose, you can't blame the matrix. So therefore, what you do, you understand, you adapt, and then make it as useful as you can. We will see that. Probability ranges. Normally, all of us tend to take this, low to high, low, medium, high, RAG, red, amber, green, RAG methodology. Most of the matrices, the visible dashboard is even called, where is the RAG report? By colloquially also, it has become RAG. That means automatically you have, given it a range, only red, amber, green. Similarly, consequence, either it is minor, which you can ignore, or catastrophic. So anything falling in between will be, yes, medium, moderate, whatever you want to call. So what do we tend to do? Because this is all ordinal, you want to put a numerical, value. So you assign some range. How do you assign it? Based on various data, experiential, your Delphi method, asking the expert, your own data-driven, loss data-driven, whatever is your source of that range. We assign that to the category or the probability ranges that you have so that you can have a multiplier. Now, if these multiplier values are arbitrarily assigned without any value, we know the naysayers why they are saying no. But if it can be done scientifically, now how do you know whether it is scientifically correct or not? Only way to know about it is to get it vetted. Whatever you have created, get it vetted by an expert. Get it vetted by an expert internally, externally, check with your peers, check with the industry guidelines, industry practices. There are any number of sources if you want to do it. So specific ranges should be adaptable, should be used for your organization, and the context in which you assign those multiplier values should be thoroughly assessed and approved, should be agreed upon, and should be relevant to you. If you take care of these things, you can then say, yes, I have a risk matrix, but I would think I understood a little bit out of it. I'm doing. One of the top exponents who think the whole thing is a bunch of rubbish, is my friend Alex Sridhar, an Australian of Russian origin, very fluent, multilingual specialist, very young man, 35, 40 years, but he has done enormous work. And he is one guy who has been I've been associated with him now for the past 7, 8 years. I have not seen Alex relent even now, despite very, academically very high profile people challenging him and all. Having said that, Alex is critical of the use of the risk matrix, the preponderance on the dependence on the risk matrix. So I don't think, I personally, in fact, in a few conversations we have had, blog exchanges we have had, he is yet to tell me, throw away the risk matrix. Throw away your current practice of using the risk matrices, seems to be his thought. I would like all of you to listen to I didn't put up the YouTube here because Alex talks about a few things that are outside the scope of this, this webinar. So I have given you a YouTube link, very, very useful YouTube. Whether you agree with that or not is not the point. You are very certain all of us can learn from that YouTube. He also does a lot of blog. He writes extensively. I have given you the URL to his blog also. You may want to subscribe depending on how much you appreciate what is written there and you want to follow it. So let's look at the other side of the coin. This is one of my, let's say, gurus, Manashik Guru, the Dronacharya to the Ekalav. Because I have not directly sat with David to learn from him, but I have never stopped learning from him. I call his approach meaningful measurement approach. David is one of the foremost thought leaders on the rule engines, particularly when we talk about risk, on calculation of risk, on calculation, particularly for some of us from the financial industry, calculation of the risk capital, risk weighted, return on capital, and so on and so forth. All those complexities. This is one gentleman who has made it extremely easy in the life of our practices. And David has his own blog. One of the most important point of David's approach is David doesn't anywhere say, throw away the risk management matrix. He says, can you intelligently use it? That means he's advocating the use. That are the two sides that I wanted to know. So what is David telling you? David says it's a reporting exercise. You said this will be the risk to the organization. You measured it. You measured the probability. You measured the severity. You put it into a matrix and you are continuously monitoring it. And therefore, it is a reporting exercise. Well, I'll say, yes, it's a large extent true, but I don't think that is the only purpose of risk management. It is one of the purposes of risk management, is my take. But I am much away from the expert levels of David. So I don't argue, but it's my own. And therefore, the visual appeal can be misleading. So you can dress it up. That's what he actually means by this. But it has opportunities. It has opportunity because it's very appealing. Can you make it meaningful and therefore use the appealing part of it to take across the meaning you want to convey? So therefore, he says, don't worry about the mathematical rules. Prepare the matrix that will be useful for you, your context, your display, your projection of what you want to project, and bring in the facts. So therefore, he says, to give you a start of understanding, let's say, okay, boss, what does this mean? Says, look at the top risks and then make the heat risk, your heat map, to align with the top risk. It may not show you the entire risk of the organization. It will show you the top 5 risks, top 8 risks, or whatever, top 3 risks, whatever you guys think are important. And therefore show what, because when we have a risk, earlier we spoke about it. You identified a risk, you put in a control. Now what do? You manage the control. You monitor the control. What are you actually doing? You are managing the performance. So your KPIs are constantly being monitored to do what? To manage your risk. So therefore, can you then bring these components into your dashboard, to your matrix? That's what he's asking. So what does he say? Can you have a top risk, report something like this? He's not prescribing anything. He uses the word chance for likelihood. He uses the word impact. If you look at the metadata there, the impact for severity. Okay. And he has already assigned the scores where it automatically populates, not only populates the value, the multipliers, but it also gives it the color coding for you to create even a report itself becoming a risk matrix. So simply by visibly looking at the pre-management score, all of us can easily identify there are 2 high risk and about 4 medium risk and 4 other, low risk. But after you have administered whatever you have to, controls and other things, now what has happened is your 2 plus 4 plus 4 has become 0 plus 1 plus 9. So therefore, what does it mean? It means that your controls are working very well. Your risk management processes are correct. Your monitoring things are correct if it can be audited. So what he is saying is, can you now convert the risk matrix into a tool by using these principles according to you? It is not, again, not finite. It is again for you to construct by using the correct variable for your requirement. That is his advocacy. So he says a heat map count of both pre and post management of the risk management controls. So you can assign the value and then say, now, because of the controls according to the values identified earlier, I have now even eliminated all the high risks. And I have just brought down the medium risk to 1. So that the management that wants or any other audience to whom you present is able to understand using this tool for the various requirements you have. So a quick sum up. One gentleman says, boss, be very critical of the risk matrix. The other gentleman says, Mr. David Bose says, don't be too dependent on it, but use it as a tool because of its, advantages that it presents. Advantage of what? Visibility, easy understandability, very focused approach. If you want to talk only about the 3 top risks, let's say in your organization, let's say Prasad, one of my friends here in the thing, Prasad wants to tell his managers only about the top 3 cyber risks. So the dashboard will bring in the entire story into the dashboard. What was the problem? What happened? How was it ranked? What are the controls that were put in, and therefore what happened? So you see, it can be to that focused a storytelling template, depending on how you design and refine the same thing. That means what David is saying is you customize it. So it is not about the matrix. It is about how well you have constructed your matrix. My own take on this is risk management is about decision making. If it is too high a risk, you don't invest money there. If there is potentially a risk, you be very careful about what you have to do. So therefore, it supports decision making, as all of us know. So therefore, the objective is to see whether it can help identify, inform, correctly the decision making people with the proper, requirement. So you need to make it a tool as a part of your overall risk management. Risk management itself is a tool for what? Decision making. And therefore, it is a tool within a tool for you to make it a very good story. So with this, we will very quickly look at the risk management process. You have to identify, analyze, and evaluate. That is your risk assessment. That is where your risk matrix comes. Based on that, your risk treatment takes place. Then there is a continuous process of both monitoring and reviewing it. Of course, communication, consultation are the input values where you can bounce it off saying, boss, that day, Dr. Rakesh, you told me that, but actually it is happening like this. Then he will tell you, okay, in which case, now you take more of this dosage and reduce the other dosage. So communication is a two-way process and not just at the start and end process. It is a continuous, process of your this thing. All of us know this from the process overview. When you have an uncertainty, and the scale of uncertainty increases, automatically the risks alongside goes up. So even where uncertainty is high, but the complexity is still very low, you will still probably plot it in the high end of it because you are not certain about the data that you have. So normally, the uncertainty, the variables that bring in a greater degree of uncertainty automatically rises or drives upwards or northwards, as I say, the risk factors. So normally, how do we plot it? We look at what, this is normally considered a template for looking at organizational appetite and all that. Advanced risk is a no. It can eat into your capital. Higher risk, yes, may bring in higher reward, but what are the safety? Moderate risk is something that you always should take. Nominal risk is what already exists. Nominal risk already exists. You go to the airport, you expect the ETD to be, 1750. It may take off at 1750 or can be. This is a nominal risk, right? So this is the normal pattern we use to use it. Risk assessment matrix that we normally use, we can plot the severity, the consequences as you can see. Then what are the increasing likelihood? That means likelihood also is not a point in any score of a probability is a point in time score. It is not the life cycle point in time score. So the probability could suddenly change, right? Suddenly in the month of April, some parts of Chennai, we had thunder showers. Now Chennai is not supposed to have any rain at all. Now wait, what changed? The likelihood changed because of certain conditionalities in the overall situation. So therefore, likelihood is not, you can't say April there will be no rain. That is an absolute statement which can be completely wrong, as it proved this month. So therefore, what you need to do is to look at whether there is need for continuous monitoring and whether you can control it to ALARP. As most of you would know, that is the acronym for as low as reasonably possible. Why we say reasonably possible? Because there is a cost benefit attached to every mitigative action. If the cost of 10 रुपए बचाने के लिए 100 रुपया खर्चा करता है क्या कोई is the question that your CFO will ask you. So as low as reasonably possible, which includes your cost benefit analysis and all that. And then when you want to take a high risk, because the rewards are very high, you want to take a high risk, you engage the stakeholders saying, boss, I'm going to take this risk, but these are the consequences that can come. And once you have organizational buy-in, that means the organizational appetite has been increased to that level, then maybe you will indulge or you will practice those, products, processes, whatever. If they say, no, we will not do it, the organizational appetite has drawn a line with which the risk response action is now very clear. So these assessment matrices help us in our decision making. A very simple granular level using David's advices is where you even assign the probability value. Be very, very careful when we do this so that what we call your range-based deficiencies don't come in. It can come with experience. You can ask experts for help. And normally when we look at what is the post-mitigative residual risk, preliminary risk is what is already there. Your mitigation in the middle is the control action, and therefore residual risk is the value after the control. After you have installed the control, what is the residual risk? If the residual risk is within your acceptable level, you are very good. And today we are in a world where everything is connected to the other thing. Tomorrow, political scene will change. Let's say in Tamil Nadu, then the industry policy with the next government might be different. So whatever you plan today, within let's say next 3 months could be different. I always say on 8 o'clock when the leader of a country comes on radio and says, Mitro, your entire cash management system can go for a toss. So it is all connected. You might have thought, how the consequences will be, but there can be an externality which can come and change it. So how interconnected are we? in using a risk matrix. These would be my thoughts that I will leave with you. And thank you for listening patiently for this last 1 hour. I hope some of it was useful. I am open to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sridhar, for again a very nice session. So I would request if any participant want to have any question, they can unmute themselves and they can ask. They can also put the question in chat box.
Dr. Rakesh, they can also send an email to
Yeah.
RMAI, which RMAI can collate and Reshma ji can send. I'll try to answer as much as I can.
Sure, sure. So if I think Mr. Sridhar has explained it very beautifully. So none of them have any questions.
Thank you. Some of them have thanked me. So generous. Thank you so much.
So if we don't have
Sir, there is a
questions-
question here.
Mhm.
High risk generally means high returns. If the management approves, I'm an exonerated. You are, sir, you are the management. You are the manager, Prasad ji. Well, there's no exoneration of anybody. If the organization suffers a loss, we also suffer a loss. You know, so very good. But if there is an approval, then at least the process, is in place. As they say, process is the key. Even risk management is a process. So if you get the process fine-tuned and constantly refine it and renew and recalibrate, you're doing very well. Most mature organizations do that.
There is one question from Mr. Ravindran. Sir, how you can relate the risk to cost? Mr. Sridhar, can you see the question?
So there are no further questions.
Now, there is one question from Mr. Ravindran. How can you relate the risk to cost?
Rakesh ji.
Yeah, can you hear me?
So thank you so much. Thanks to everybody.
Yeah, Mr. Sridhar, can you hear me?
Sir, I can't hear you.
Okay, okay.
Suddenly the audio seems to have gone.
Achha, achha. I think there is one more question. You can just check in the chat box.
Yeah. So any issues anybody think that I will be useful to answer? I'm willing to take, sir.
Yeah. I think there is a question from Mr. Ravindran. How do you relate the risk to cost?
How do you relate risk to cost? Risk itself is a cost, because risk identified has to be mitigated. When you mitigate the risk, there are certain cost elements to that. That is why we call it cost benefit. So therefore, when you have identify a risk and you are going to mitigate it, what are you expecting? What is the objective of that mitigation? To what extent you want to mitigate? There are certain type of risks that you cannot mitigate. So what you do, you don't either practice it or you don't indulge in such activities, or you simply, what is called, leave it to fate sort of a thing. If there is in California, particularly, there is a fault, all of us know, if there is a major earthquake and something goes, it goes. That's all. Because you can't, take an action to every risk you identify. So what we do, we relate it to a cost and a benefit. So risk is a cost which will derive, because you invested that cost, it will derive a benefit. When the benefit is larger, obviously your risk cost is always. So risk is always a cost. Risk is always a cost. Cost of what? As we say, even colloquially, risk is the cost of doing business. That means if you take risk, only you can do business. There are risks in business. All estimations won't happen. You go open your shop tomorrow morning, you think you will have, let's say, 500,000 rupees sales. How are you sure that it will happen 500,000? It can be more, it can be less. So how do you know? How did you decide it 500,000 to now look at the delta? Because of earlier data points during the month of April, because बच्चों का school छुट्टियां होता है, so therefore, माँ बाप लोग तो बहुत वो summer कपड़े खर्चा करता है, All these pointers that you have gathered over a particular period will make you decide, Hanji, so I can now estimate a 500,000 sale. And then when actuals happen, you do the delta. Now the delta is too large, you are probably losing market share. If the delta is too high, probably you underestimated your sales. Therefore, you did not stock enough or whatever. So risk is always a cost. Risk is a cost of doing business. How do you mitigate it? By proper risk management. And therefore, that proper risk management itself comes with exact mechanisms of application of the mitigative action, which will bring in whatever desired result. And that also is only an estimation at the point of decision making. It has to be implemented and then seen what is happening. What we call experiential data. You experience the process. Most of the time, you will be correct if your data points, your decision making speed is correct, your implementation is correct. So you see the dependencies, the variables. So therefore, when you say risk to cost, you have to understand risk itself is the cost.
Thank you.
That is why we say, sir, there is a return on investment, all of you know. If you invest 100 rupees in my bank and my bank pays you 8% interest, return on investment is 8%. Simple, PNR by 100. All of us know this. What is the risk-weighted return on interest? Now suddenly the calculation suddenly changes. Why? Because you are now brought in other variables like what is the risk of investing with one particular bank? What is the risk of not investing here, but because there is an opportunity loss somewhere else, so on and so forth. So depending on what you want to do, that is the key. I hope I have answered your question, Mr. Ravindran. Ravindran Kodandapani.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Sridhar.
Thank you.
So I think a big thank you for all the participants. And we are planning again a session on 13th of May. It will be most probably on liability insurance. We will soon update the topic in our group and in our website also. So you can register from there and details will be followed. So thank you, Mr. Sridhar, and all participants for joining in. This link will be shared in our group also. So thanks again for joining.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.